what happens when we are in society and we have conditionings and traumas that our pineapple, our vessel, can become inhibited and tense in areas. So when that happens, this pineapple might become deformed in some areas. And so when air is moving through this pineapple to resonate and create voice, it can be distorted and stunted and tense. And so that's how you get different sounds that are less full of spirit.
Welcome to Perspective Switch. Today's guest is Phoenix Shantor.
Hi, I'm Lonnie Diane, and this is Phoenix Shantor. Thank you for introducing yourself.
Phoenix, what are we going to be talking about today?
We are going to be talking about voice and trauma and heart rate variability.
Awesome. Let's start with, why does voice matter?
Voice matters because...
Wait, we have to preface this whole podcast with the fact that sometimes Phoenix doesn't like being asked questions. So this is going to be great. And I felt like that question was kind of a little...
Well, now we have, there's a fourth part, audience, human design. According to the human design system, I am a manifestor or a type, which is said to be initiating, not responsive. And I vibe with that. Initiate, okay. Well, then we're going to talk about this pineapple. If this pineapple was the human body, it would be capable of speaking. It would be capable of resonating. Let's say this pineapple is a newborn pineapple baby. We're using this, again, as an analogy for the human body. And so when this pineapple is born, air can move through it and resonate to create incredible sounds. So when you hear a baby, they, I don't have the best baby. I'll just go on record saying that. When you hear a baby, they are so free and uninhibited that when they are breathing and vocalizing, they're using the entirety of their body to resonate and make noise. But what happens when we are in society and we have conditionings and traumas that our pineapple, our vessel, can become inhibited and tense in areas. So when that happens, this pineapple might become deformed in some areas. And so when air is moving through this pineapple to resonate and create voice, it can be distorted and stunted and tense. And so that's how you get different sounds that are less full of spirit. And I would use spirit to identify the truth of one's fullest expression.
Wow. Wow.
So that's why voice matters, because our voice communicates what we are truly feeling, what our intentions are, what our perceptions are, truly on a more fully telepathic level that goes beyond words.
So something really interesting about Phoenix is when he just did that really deep voice, that was actually how he used to speak 100% of the time. How long ago was that?
Well, you know, it's, I think when I exited that, if I had to put a singular timestamp on that, maybe 5 years ago. But it's sort of with any of this, I guess, spiritual stuff, a patterning. And so I had landmarks and growth, but would fall back into my patterns and still do in some respect. But yes, I used to talk with a lot of tension in my soft palate and my tongue, and would resonate in what, in the voice work I do, is known as the woofer, whereas this would be the tweeter, and this is the woofer. But my safe space was over here, and so I was bunched up. There's two things happening that I can see looking back. Is one, the emotions that I was not able to express it just got very guttural, like there was a lot of gunk in here. And if I went outside of that, I think my truth would be revealed, all of the sadness and anger and depression and all these emotions that I didn't feel that I could express, or even my feminine side was something that I was not permitting myself to do. And then from a muscular standpoint, all those muscles can be very tense. And just now talking and checking in with myself, still working on shoulder tension, which goes into the voice. And so unpatterning that voice has been a journey of doing what is essentially yoga for the voice. And through that can identify and find ways to release tension, to get back into my more autonomous way of speaking, to become once again a perfect divine pineapple. I defaulted into a remix on that divine.
Have you noticed a change in my voice over the last couple years that we've known each other?
Yes, and how we've known each other for almost, well, I guess 3 years now. So I came in like March. Wow.
Yep.
Yes, yeah, I would say for you, which is very common, I think typically what I find is that we can get polarized. And I think that's such a beautiful word to use in this sense that we can think of the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere of the earth, or a pineapple, to use a pineapple again. And so we can become polarized in our expression to get more into that southern hemisphere or that northern hemisphere. I think relating the southern hemisphere being to this woofer place, and then the tweeter being this more head resonance space, and so we can become polarized to one of those two areas. In that way, I think we both had a similar journey that we were polarized to this woofer. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of more defaulted to feeling safe speaking out of our chest resonance. Mm-hmm. And so I think, yeah, over the past 3 years that I've known you, when we met, I think you were much more in the woofer space and resonating in your neck, throat area. And now I think hearing you speak, there is much more tweeter activation and much more excitement that I hear, or a possibility for the expression of excitement, which I didn't hear before.
Yeah, I think one thing that has been really profound for me is sometimes when I'm feeling sad or depressed or just really low, you hear it in my voice, right? Like it gets kind of like monotone and flat. But I think you've told me so many times of like to speak with more tonality when I'm feeling that way, to shift me out of that emotional state of being. Like we can actually kind of control or initiate another emotional state by changing the way that we speak. Do you feel that?
Just yesterday morning, I was watching this. I got back into Gaia. If you don't know, Gaia is a streaming site. It's really cool. And I got another free trial because I was feeling compelled to research some stuff for a play I'm writing. And I came across this video where there are these folks who have created this device, and it assesses your voice. And through that, it has this algorithm that can match up with, according to them, high accuracy, what blood toxins or toxins in your blood you have. And I think it went beyond that, but I don't want to misspeak and put things on there. But basically, they can tell what is happening in your biology, things that necessarily you don't want in there based upon how you're speaking. And so for me, that brought up that idea of like chicken versus egg. Is the vocal pattern coming first and creating the toxins, or the toxins there and then creating that vocal pattern? But tying it into what you're saying, yes, I think we can definitely shift our emotional state, because, as we were saying before, with our pineapple body, that if we have restrictions or tightness in our voice, we are restricting certain emotions, that we're taking on those tensions to defend ourselves. We, at different times, might feel that, for me, talking in this way is nobody I feel like nobody's going to really mess with me if I'm talking like this, as opposed to, if I'm very fun, loving, and feminine in my expression, I feel like I'm more of a target from my vocal standpoint. And so, yes, I think that our voice is successfully sending out a signal of emotions. And so if you're resonating habitually with these more lower density vibrations, it is successfully deterring whatever you're trying to stop from the outside, but it's taking a hit on you where that is affecting your biology. And yes, I think by simply playing around with experimenting with your voice, you're able to resonate your body differently. And if you resonate with everything being frequency and vibration, if you can vocalize differently, you are changing your biology, tying that into like Dr. Emoto water. Those experiments of if you talk lovingly to water, the geometry of the structure is very beautiful and crystalline, but if you have, screaming at it, you say you hate it, then it's going to look deformed and perhaps not as pleasant. And I think the same thing is happening all the time when we are speaking, that we're mostly water, and so the vibration we're sending out is affecting the water within us, but our biology in full. And so yes, I think if you want to shift your state, you can do so by experimenting with different vocal patterns. And I think we have a perfect segue to touch upon heart rate variability, which I mentioned from the beginning. Heart rate variability is the measurement of how many differences there are between heartbeats. So if your heart beats like a metronome, that is actually indicative of an unhealthy nervous system, because that means you're controlling what is happening rather than going to the flow of chaos. If you can increase your heart rate variability, there will be different amounts of milliseconds in between each heartbeat. With that, you have better reaction time, you have an improved immune system, your digestion is better, your vagal tone just overall is much improved. And so talking about shifting states, I think if we're in a state where we're off our voice, and if we're monotone, flat, we're sending out a very specific vibration, and being in these low density spots, we again are in that defensive position, and because of that, our heart rate variability is much like a metronome. It's controlling, it's defending. So shifting moods, you can do so, I think, vocally, have a lot of fun with that. And then also heart rate variability, training that through many different methods. My favorite would be the Inner Balance Sensor by Heart Math Institute, which I don't have on my person right now. I'd love to demo it because I believe in it so much. And we've experimented with that at that hostel we were living at together where we met. But basically you can utilize this thing to get into a specific breathing pattern to identify where your stress levels are at. And through that, you can increase your heart rate variability. And what I found, there's a direct correlation to how I sound. The higher my heart rate variability, the more expressive I am, the more on my voice, my singing voice. I present myself in my spirit, and when I'm presenting to the world, I feel like are much more synchronized, where if it's low, not as much.
And then how does this all relate to trauma relief?
Yes, perfect. So we have our pineapple. We were talking about how our pineapple is our body, and if it's uninhibited body, there aren't any tensions, it flows. Heart rate variability is super high. So trauma is the very thing that is inhibiting our body and making our heart rate variability lower. I have never resonated with doing talk therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been recommended to me multiple times, but I've just felt that wasn't going to work for me. And I met with somebody recently. They work at, I don't want to get the name wrong, but basically they work at a facility that tests for people with high amounts of trauma. Specifically, they were they were studying rape victims and people with high levels of stress to see what works to rid them of tension. And they find, of course, there can be exceptions to this, that if you have super high level PTSD from whatever realm, that talking about your problems is not really going to do much for you. You have to go in there, get to the feeling of it, release the emotion, and do something at a somatic body level to really make a difference. My trajectory, I had all these inhibitions to my voice and tensions, and some of them I can trace to being monkey see, monkey do is the term I'm looking for, nature versus nurture. So it was very much my nurture that I picked up, identified the men in my family speak a little lower, but not quite as low as me. And I was an intensified version of an already low voice family. And I didn't have any of the conscious memories of this, but little by little, doing psychedelics and breath work and yoga for, I guess, probably 4 years, until I really had progress, had these memories of being choked and raped when I was 7 years old. And so what I have found in my own journey is that I had all these the thing I could feel most was being angry and depressed and just sad and lonely and you name it, all these lower density emotions. And that's what I was living in. And then little by little doing voice work and breath work and psychedelics was able to see the trauma behind that. And now I think as a result of working on these things, I have found that my heart rate variability, I measure this with biofeedback, is much higher than it used to be. I feel much better and I have much more range of my voice. I'm able to express myself, my emotions, and also just tones and pitches that I can reach. And so I see for myself that negative emotions are tied to lower heart rate variability, low vocal expression, habitual, consistent vocal patterns being monotone, and then other side of that, moving past trauma and still working on that, having much higher heart rate variability, much more vocal resonance and expression, and just overall much more joy and happiness and excitement and hope in my life. So that is how I personally tie in heart rate variability, voice, and trauma.
What is one thing someone could do tonight to better themselves within one of these areas?
Finding a voice, pattern, tone, or pitch that makes you uncomfortable and speaking in it. Because I think in our society, we become so attached to how we sound that there is an innate primal fear of going outside of our character, that we don't want to be ostracized. And I think it takes a lot of emotional and muscular effort to maintain a singular vocal identity. And so if you're able to break outside of that, you can start to rediscover emotions that might be blocked. So whether this be something that feels like a cartoon voice, or maybe playing around with primal vocalization,
What's your
impersonating
favorite
an
cartoon
animal.
voice?
Favorite cartoon
To
voice?
impersonate.
I don't know if I pick favorites, but
Well, what makes you really happy?
really that I can impersonate?
Yeah, that you can impersonate.
So growing up, we had a family dog named Adelaide, and it became a family thing, which we all did this voice, which Adelaide had this voice called, we would call her Pappy. And so I think this one has a lot of nostalgia to it and reminds me of being with my family and our dog and just all of the jokes and narratives that go into that. So I think this one.
Elmo.
I Elmo's just not been.
can't?
I think it's a
Cookie Monster.
if I can. I don't know if you can see that. I have a very large resonance chamber, and that's my one theory as to why Elmo, it just sounds too deep. A Cookie Monster, what does Cookie Monster even sound like? Cookie Monster. Cookie. I could do a squilly-yum. I was thinking about that this morning.
That?
It's not Squidward tying it into the pineapple, SpongeBob. Squilly-yum is Squidward's cousin. So there's an episode in which they go
I've never seen Squidward's cousin.
Yeah, there's the episode, they're performing in the Dome. There's a concert. And
Oh, wait.
Squidward.
I do know who you're talking about now.
Yeah.
He's a musician, right?
He is, yeah. I think
Okay.
very successful.
Prestigious.
Yeah.
Posh.
And Squidward, not as much. SpongeBob. Oh, I go, it's a giraffe. I go, hey, SpongeBob. Patrick.
I knew that, yeah.
Okay,
Do you have
I didn't
any?
know if that was clear. I haven't done that in a while. I don't know if it resonated.
Can you do SpongeBob?
No.
Not even gonna try.
It's too... Again, I'm not hitting that. He's very nasally, but I have too much, like chest resonance when I'm in that nasal. So maybe I could just go to isolate the tweeter more to get there.
How about any accents?
Absolutely. So I think really fascinating, I was burping as I was trying to get this accent out, that our voices, so we can think of our voices being shaped by trauma and the way we're nurtured, but also society. So I guess nurture, I would think of sort of the households or, formative figures that you grow up with. And so you sort of will subconsciously identify what muscles they are using to create sound, and you'll mimic that. And so you often see babies playing around with different sounds to see, like, how are they doing that? And so if you want to do a different accent, one, you have to identify what your habitual tensions are. So when I was doing this, this would have been a little more of a stretch, because if you're doing specifically more refined estuary British accent, or, European accents in general are going to have far less tongue tension. And so if you can loosen your tongue enough, you can more easily get into it. And I think that's exactly why a lot of British actors are able to do American accents so well, but not the case vice versa. Now, probably the easiest British accent that we with American oral postures can get into would be Cockney, because for that one, you're imploring nasality, but there's more tongue tension, I think, there. And so, if you're going Cockney, there's this thing where there's sort of a punch to it. So I think that's sort of American. And if you do fricatives and so instead of making a TH sound, if you use put your teeth to your bottom lip, you can do a fricative there. And so they employ a lot of those in a lot of glottal stops. So it's a sound. So it's sort of this kick from the back. And so you can do that. Or if you're dating Scottish, you've got to manipulate. I was mentioning before when I talked like this, my soft palate. Yeah. But if you're doing Scottish, you've really got to raise that soft palate, because habitually, people in Scotland, when they're mimicking their parents, they might be vocalizing as a newborn child. I think generally, I guess there would be some biological variances among there, but generally speaking, if you're a baby, babies are all vocalizing in a very similar way, and so they're learning to manipulate their soft palate to do their Scottish thing. And so if you're growing up as a baby pineapple in Scotland, you've got to really practice doing the soft palate raise. And if you're doing Irish, there's a lot of lip round in there. And, well, I had too much, I think, flap there, which is going more Scottish. But yeah, if you're doing an Irish accent, there's going to be a lot more lip round in there. And again, the tongue is loose, and there's more of a lilt and musicality to it. I think I need to practice that one because I feel it falling.
Have you ever done Australian?
I haven't specifically studied it in length, so I don't have the confidence behind it. But to take a crack at it, it would, I think, be similar to Cockney because I think there is a lot of nasality to it. And so I love, there's this phrase, it's called a trigger phrase, and that can be a sentence to start you off that you feel really confident with a voice. And so to go into Australian, I'd want to find a trigger phrase to go in there.
It's okay. What about Southern?
Babby, on the babby. Oh, similar to Boston. Southern, yeah, that's that's like my competitive side's coming out. I really want to get good at Australian now.
Well,
Hey mate. Hey, yeah, mate. If you do is sort of Australian, I think it's Cockney again. But yeah, if you're doing Southern's a lot of resonance talking about, resonating in the throat and the chest voice where not every, Southern voice is going to have this, but I think it is, such a part of the culture that, there is kind of a built-in defensiveness to, not all, I don't want to generalize, but some. I think that, Wild West, like Southern voice, you got to tighten the tongue a lot.
Can you do a New York accent?
I grew up in the area, and I've never practiced it. But my dad is from New York, and he definitely has maintained aspects of that. I'm trying to figure out, because then my mom has picked up more of a New England accent from when she went to college, and they both say coffee differently. So I think my dad would say coffee, and my mom would say Kathy, maybe more so, but not as much. Well, coffee. So yeah, I guess maybe to get into New York, I guess I would just kind of default to this sort of a thing. And I think that with New York, there's probably more jaw accent jaw movement than some other parts of the country where I think Boston would have a lot of open jaw too. That's cool. So I think Boston would be leaning towards more of that A sound, and then probably lip rounding with New York. It's got more of that rounded sound. So yeah, I think that would be my New York. I think that you got to stick with like maybe 3 notes. So you can think of different accents as different songs you're singing. And so I think if you're doing New York, you only get 3 notes to play with. Whereas if you're speaking in a British accent, you have probably 12 different notes. And I think that's why generally also British speakers can be seen as just naturally more gifted with speaking because they have built into their accent much more availability for expression where they're not constrained to.
Do you know what a British posh accent is?
I think that would
specifically.
That would probably be like the received pronunciation more so from acting or estuary. And I think that would be just a lot more jaw movement and crisp articulation of consonants. And so posh, you really want to, I think, really punch every consonant that you have and maybe elongate all of your vowels more so than you would, which I think comes off as being very arrogant because you're taking your time speaking. There's almost no, maybe a perceived disconcern for the listener's time because I'm so posh and rich that I have all the time in the world to make all the sounds I want.
You can throw in a
And make sure to sip your delicious tea.
It's a very slow laugh. It's very
And it's maybe very abbreviated, where you're not even going to give them the full laugh all at once. Just little bit here, but not too much, because you don't mean that much to me. A little bit.
All right. So with all of that being said, if you could say one message to every single human in this world, what would that message be?
Brevity is not my strong point, so if we're picking one again, I feel like I'm going into a tangent. One message to send out to anybody about anything?
To every single person. And it has to be the same message to every single person.
Yeah, on it. Perfect. I think out of everything I've ever done, the most resonant thing to me is focusing on heart rate variability, because this, going into electromagnetics, science is now catching up with what spiritual wisdoms I think have found over the ages, but didn't have the data to back up. But again, I'm gonna just plug Heart Mouth Institute. I feel another burp coming on. Excuse me. But I'm gonna plug Heart Mouth Institute because they have measured, or beginning to measure, the effects of the individual's heart rate variability and what that does to the electromagnetic web that we are all a part of. And it's so beautiful because I think it validates that spiritual wisdom, that the best thing we can do for one another is, as a starting point, we have to fill our own cup before we can fill anybody else's cup. And so viewing things from a stance of heart rate variability, when you're doing what you love, your heart rate variability is high. When you're showing authentic love and care, your heart rate variability is high. And so when you're doing what you love and doing what lights you up and naturally finding those ways to spread your love, electromagnetically, you are sending out a very powerful signal from your heart center that is, whether or not you know it, affecting people around you, and vice versa. If you're full of trauma, if you're stressed out, if you're in these lower density emotions, that is electromagnetically also sending out a signal of fight or flight. And so I think from the primal side of us, it's kind of sending out that signal that a lion's about to kill us. So if the message I would say, to keep it short, is awareness of one's heart rate variability is, to me, at least in this part of my journey, the highest form of service you could do for yourself or anybody else. Yeah, I would like to know, so we experimented with heart rate variability on one or more occasions. What is your perception of all that? Because it resonates with me so much. And like, I'm writing a play about it now, and actually multiple plays, because I love the concept. I really want to get that message out there. It doesn't seem to translate too well to people. Like, they see it and I'm like, yeah, whatever.
I honestly still don't even really know what it is.
Perfect.
I think after this podcast, I have a better understanding. But during the podcast, I realized that I literally didn't know what it was at all. And when we were doing it in the basement, right?
Yeah.
On the mat and like keeping track of it. And I think what I was trying to do was either meditate, lower my heart rate, or to really feel into my heart center and send out the gratitude. I think like scientifically what you're saying is that our heart rate could be like steady, right? But we actually don't want that. We want it to be like a little bit off so that we can react quicker.
Yeah, it's the algorithm for flow state.
Yeah. And
so if we're in the natural flow of natural order, which is chaos, then yeah, it's going to be kind of all over the place.
Okay. So it's like, it's interesting to be able to measure it, right? But then like there's obviously things to do that will give you what you want, right? So it's more focusing on the activities.
Yes, yeah, I think finding, like, I think, yeah, switch is what a spiritual practice is for me. And it kind of goes back because we've been talking a lot about Kyle Cease and love so much of what he says. But I mean, just over the past like 3 weeks, I've been having like kind of a renaissance with getting back into meditating hours a day with this heart rate variability device. And then diving into more of their videos. They're theorizing that basically kind of the fake it till you make it, more so Abraham Hicks style of spirituality is the way to go, saying that you can unwire and do away with trauma by consistently bringing up the authentic, feeling of gratitude and revitalization, and that dwelling too much in those shadow states while, you need to acknowledge it to move through it, but living there is not really going to help you. And so it's like finding what patterns you can do, like working out or exercising, breath work, cold shock therapy, doing all these things that can get your heart rate variability up. But then also having the awareness of seeing when it dips to then kind of going into, when I'm meditating, I know that there's specific memories that I can really go back into to jack up my heart rate variability. So if I feel it dipping, I can kind of step back into those and unpattern these things I've learned from society or my upbringing and all of this that just don't serve me anymore. So I think that's really beautiful.
Cool, thank you. Is there anything else you want to say before we end this? Hello. I can say like one word or 2 words in an accent.
Well, I can teach you Cockney.
Hello.
5 seconds. If you push air through your nose, so if you close your nose here and then you just focus on sending all of the air out here, and then continue that, right? And then
continue
there, and then do whatever your attempt at like a British accent is.
Whatever no. No. Continue. Just continue doing my British.
Yeah, doing a British accent. And I think if you just funnel whatever your British accent is through your nose, it'll be more cockney. That's an oversimplification, but I think that's a way of sort of getting in there. Yeah.
To just tie everything together and share a little bit about me is I feel like I resonate with what you said about the past 3 weeks and focusing on your heart rate variability and seeing when it dips and then bringing it back up is I've really just been focusing on the good stuff, like editing my videos and like getting stuff done and taking care of myself. And if there is anything kind of like negative or lower vibration, I don't ignore it, but like I just don't give it that much time. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's there. I feel this, like, cool, this is gonna pass too, And
I think to piggyback or maybe bring this even more full circle, in those moments where we're practicing gratitude, and that one thing that you can do tonight, experimenting with a voice. So I identify as queer and non-binary, and so for me, I know that I guess when I'm most joyous, just naturally what happens, I get more sibilant, and it's more of that like gay voice, quote unquote, to like stereotype it. But even just playing around with this, it's accessing a much different emotional palette, where if I'm doing this voice, I cannot be in the same emotional state that I was if I'm doing this one. Like it changes what's happening inside my body, right? And so I think if you're wanting to experiment with something, maybe this is where you naturally resonate, and that's so beautiful. I love you. But if this is new to you, if this is scary, I'd say try this out and just see how uncomfortable it makes you feel, how joyous maybe it makes you feel, how free maybe it makes you feel, because what you are doing at a vibrational level is completely different than, where you might be. We gotta all the time otherwise. And I think it's that one is fun to me because that is an easy way I think to shift mood and get back into the gratitude state, because I have a ball going up into those higher ranges.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome, Lonnie. Stay tuned here for Perspective Switch.
Stay curious.